When people talk about learning styles, this is what they're talking about. I'm sure you've heard of the 3 different learning styles or modalities of audio, visual, and kinesthetic, but there are actually some subcategories to each of those that are very important if you want to really be able to tap into your child's learning style. So we're going to talk about those 3 and all of their subcategories. So the first modality is auditory, and it's broken down into 2 different categories, and that is verbal or listening. And a lot of times I think of auditory as listening, and people who have the listening subcategory really do love to listen. This is audiobooks, this is music in the background, and it's not just, hey, I like music, but without it, I can't think, I can't learn. So it's really a vitally important part of their education to have some background music or background sound, even if it's just people talking in the background. That's really important for their ability to concentrate. That would be a listening learning style. They also love learning through stories, through rhythm or rhyme, and they especially love accents. In fact, a lot of these different types of learners, these auditory learners, they can do accents really well because they can hear it and they can imitate it with their mouth. So that can be an indicator that you are dealing with a listening learning style, is that they are really very good at hearing accents and identifying, oh, that's South Britain versus, you know, kind of an Irish brogue. They can hear all those different varieties in there. But there's another kind of auditory learner as well, and that's verbal. And these guys speak to learn, which means if somebody's saying it to them, they're not necessarily getting it. Or if they're reading, they're not really getting it. They have to say it out loud in order to process the information. So these kids a lot of times will say, I don't understand it. And you can ask them and say, well, what don't you understand? What are you hearing? And they'll sort of talk it through, and suddenly they get it. And it's not that they're trying to be difficult or that they just wanted to hear themselves think. They need to hear themselves think. That this process of saying it out loud actually creates a logical connection inside their brain so that now they understand it, whereas they didn't when somebody else said it. So audio does not mean just listening. Sometimes you have to actually be the one speaking in order for that to click in. And that's just a subcategory of auditory learner. If you do have a verbal learner, one of the greatest things for them is to read out loud, either the story or if there's a question that they don't understand, just read the question out loud and that will make it click for them. That it seems so simple and almost like, why would you have to do that? But that is actually a literal thing inside their brain. They have to say it out loud and then it will make sense. So just knowing that one tool can be really powerful if you have a verbal learner. The next modality is visual. There's a lot of preference given to this modality in our world, but there aren't, it's maybe a third of people who have this. So what we do a lot of times is naturally good for this, but there are 2 subcategories here. There are picture learners, and so these learners tend to see an image and it makes sense to them. They're really good at reading graphs or charts or timelines. Something that's written out in a picture format just makes sense to them. And if you were to say it out loud or even have the words written that explain this chart, it's going to be confusing, whereas if they can see it in this picture, suddenly it makes sense. Movies, little video clips are more than just entertainment for these guys. They actually make sense in a way that other ways of bringing that information in, it doesn't process as well for them. So these picture learners are really good at seeing visual images and being able to make sense of them. Whereas if you're not a picture learner, you could actually be a print learner. And pictures don't necessarily make sense. That you are a visual learner, but just looking at that picture or watching a movie may be entertaining or fascinating, but it doesn't click, it won't stick as well as seeing words on a page. These guys will remember, oh, I saw that phrase, that word, whatever, it was on this spot of this page and it was about this far into the book. I think a lot of people who are this type of learner have a very hard time with digital books because the digital book moves, and so you're never quite sure where that word is on the page, and that makes it a little bit harder to remember where you saw that. But these guys think in words. So if you're explaining a picture, you're describing a picture, they're seeing the words that describe that picture. So this is how the information comes to them. They are typically very good spellers because they do see the words all the time. They're very good at that. One of the most effective ways to teach to this type of learner is just to have them highlight, because that makes those words pop off the page for them. And so that's how they learn. Then they can just remember what words they actually saw. They're also really good at reading or writing. That helps them process the information. If they can just see it, they don't have to read it out loud. They don't have to have somebody read it to them. Just seeing the words on the page is enough for them to really let it stick in their head. So the last modality is tactile or kinesthetic. Now this one is interesting because at least a third of the population learns with this particular modality, but we have kind of allowed no quarter for it. We don't allow people to learn in this way, and if they do, it's kind of looked down on, like you're lesser because you have to manipulate things. But this is a valid way to learn. This is just as valid as any other way to learn, and I think we really need to adjust our thinking that if a child, the first thing they do is grab something and mess with it and touch it and try to figure it out physically, we shouldn't look at that as disobedient or frustrating. That's just how they're learning, just like somebody else is going to look at it and read the words or look at the chart or hear somebody explain it to them. This is just one more way to process information, and a lot of people have this modality, so we really have to accept that this is one way of learning. It's not a frustration in our lives. It's just a way to process information for at least a third of the population. Possibly you have this modality and we don't respect it very much, so it's hard for us to recognize it. But this has 4 different subcategories in it, and so there are different ways that it shows itself. The first one is the whole body learner. Now, I have a child who just could not hold still while he was talking to me. He would walk in circles around me, or he would be juggling or messing with the Rubik's Cube, or like his body was in motion. And I did a little experiment with him where I just made him hold still. I was like, I want to hear what you have to tell me. Hold still and tell me. And I wouldn't let him move. And he could not talk to me. He couldn't tell me what was inside his head. He couldn't communicate it because he was blocked, because his ability to speak was directly connected to his ability to move. And when we tell kids, hold still or be quiet, you're not just saying, don't do things that are difficult for me. You're actually shutting down their ability to learn. A lot of these kids, they are not able to process the information or make it a part of who they are because we're taking away how they process information. So whole body learners need to move their whole body. And this can be difficult. It takes an adjustment in your head. You have to say, I am okay with you walking around the room while you're learning. I am okay with you bouncing a ball up and down to help you figure something out. I'm okay with you balancing on something, on a balancing beam or something, so that you can actually think. I'm okay with you writing on a big chalkboard or whatever to enable you to use your whole body to learn. This is just something that people need to learn. So it's important to adapt how we value learning and say, I recognize that you moving is actually how you learn, and I will make space for that and really value it. Another subcategory of this is hands-on, and so they want to really touch things. These are the kids who are going to reach out and grab something and put it together or pull it apart, build it or disassemble it. These kids actually discover and learn through physically pulling something apart or building it or creating it in some way physically. This is how they learn, and allowing them that space to be able to do that. And not only allowing it, but providing modeling kits and providing opportunities for them to use this skill. This is how they learn. So this is a great learning style as well. So this next one is also a tactile or kinesthetic, but it's not big or flashy or loud at all. It's just sketching. So these guys are going to draw, or they'll doodle a lot. While you're talking to them, they'll be sketching on the side of their book. And a lot of teachers have a hard time and say, you're not paying attention to me. This is required for them to be able to pay attention. If you have kids who need to sit down and listen to a lecture for whatever reason, who have this modality, give them something to mess with. Let them have a stress ball, or those fidget spinners. Those don't work, in my opinion, because the fidget spinner is spinning, they're just holding still, and that's not fidgeting. They actually have to fidget. They actually have to touch things and rub things, and that will enable them to think. And a lot of times this is associated with learning problems. There's like, oh, you have an incapacity that you're not able to pay attention without touching something, then there's something wrong with your brain. There's nothing wrong with their brains. This is actually how they learn. This is just a different modality that we don't make a lot of space for. And I think that's important, especially in homeschool, to just make space for that and say there's nothing wrong with you. They can be distracting in a group. That can be something that you need to work on and say you are actually causing it a difficulty for other people in this group to pay attention because they're just watching you. So you need to be able to respect other people in the group as well. But as far as learning, it's absolutely a valid way to learn, is to have something that they're touching and manipulating the whole time. And the last subcategory of this is very little motion, in fact, very little touch. These guys don't need to really touch anything. They're just writing learners. And so they will take what they're learning and write it down. And they're kind of like verbal learners this way, that they're not, it's all about the words for them. But in this case, they need to write the words down. So that's where it's kinesthetic, that there's this physical action that they're taking to be able to process the information that they're having and put it somewhere in their brain that they can hold on to it. They just have to write the words down in order to accomplish this. All of these modalities are valid ways to learn. In fact, they're essential ways to learn for each of our kids. However they learn, that's how they learn. And we need to teach them that way so that they can actually receive information. But a lot of times we will sort of throw everything at the wall and say, well, you're a kinesthetic learner, so let's go do huge whole body things. Let's go act something out. And really they're just writing. And so that makes them very uncomfortable to have to act something out. So it's more than just knowing, hey, you learn by doing. You have to deep dive a little bit more and say there's a specific way that you learn. And this, I don't want this to be overwhelming and feel like, oh, I have to adapt everything to every single child. I'm just a slave to their education. I can't do anything the way that I want to do it. That's not it at all. You can totally do things the way that makes sense to you. I'm just saying, don't assume that because somebody happens to be an audio learner that they're going to pick it up just by listening. It's possible that they also need to say it out loud. So understanding the different facets of these can really give you the tools that you need to be really successful in teaching your kids. I think you are doing a fabulous job teaching your kids. I think you're doing a wonderful job learning about all the different options for teaching. We're just going to pick it up one little piece at a time and grow and develop as we go. So don't be overwhelmed by this, but it is a lot of fun to know what the options are so that we can become much more effective in everything we do. Thank you, and I will see you on the next one.